This is Talk TV, live tonight from the Talk Radio studio with me, Darryl Morris. International News Hour is on as we journey around the world to Australia, where Rachel Brunsden is for us tonight. She is a radio presenter based in Melbourne. Always nice to have you on the show, Rachel. Hello there.
Hello there. You're going to play a cracker of a clip,
Oh,
and you and I
really
can talk about mispronunciation of names.
This is excellent, isn't it? This is excellent.
It really is. It was one of those things where it's been a pretty heavy week politically around the world, and this just made everything just so much better because everybody's a human being, and it was on display with Justin Trudeau. Bless him.
It was. So this is Justin Trudeau, Canadian Prime Minister, of course, meeting with for the first time, as Justin Trudeau makes clear a few times during his bad padding, the first time that he'd met the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, and seemed to struggle to remember his name for a brief moment. Here's what happened.
It's a real pleasure to be meeting with a great progressive leader. We're really, really excited to have a friend in Australia. Australia's been a long-time friend.
He did get there in the end, didn't he? He did get there in the end.
He did. He sort of mumbled. It trailed off. He mumbled, Tony. I thought, good on you, mate, for having a crack. I mean, it was good work. Bless him.
We've all been there.
I mean, can you imagine that? Well, you have. But I mean, you have to remember that these people have met how many people over that couple of days. So, you know, and he is a new Prime Minister, so it would have been a little bit. But Joe Biden famously forgot Scott Morrison, our previous Prime Minister. He forgot his name during a very important speech, and they had been in a relationship for a very long time. And he called him that bloke from Australia. So, you know, good on you, Justin. Good try. And he did get it right in the end.
You did. And actually, you can imagine those. I mean, they're at a NATO summit this week. You can imagine that being so intense and so full of detail, and so many people that you've got to talk to, and so much you've got to process that the mere task of remembering names becomes an enormous mountain to climb. Let's talk about that summit then, Rachel, because our leader has been there, as yours has as well. Possibly one of the most important gatherings of NATO member states at the moment, with the war in Ukraine rumbling on as it does, and the G7 summit in Germany happening as well. So a bit of a tour of those big international moments, and a massive moment as well for your new man, for a new Prime Minister. This is first time, isn't it, at these big international summits?
It is, and given that he was only elected in May, he's been very busy. He's been all over the place and trying to sort of, I guess you would say, repair relationships, particularly with France, with Macron. A submarine deal went sour when Scott Morrison was Prime Minister. We basically pulled the pin on a very large contract we had with France to build submarines for us, and we handed that over to the United States because, I mean, we are sort of beholden to them, and it wasn't really his fault, but the way it was handled was pretty poor. And then the French decided to leak text messages about it because, you know, why not? But I think they had Anthony Albanese and Macron had a very warm, nice meeting, and I think fences are being mended there. So hopefully all is well. But I mean, you're right. G7, NATO. It was all about Ukraine. It was all about China. It was all about energy prices and the cost of living and everything else that's been escalated by this invasion of Ukraine. So, I mean, there was really a lot going on. For a guy to forget somebody else's name, I think that's okay.
Yeah, that seems perfectly reasonable. You say repair relationships, and certainly with America, we may have touched on this in the past, Rachel, but as we were sort of considering what this new administration in Australia would look like and would do, and it certainly feels as though Biden and Tony and Joe are better bedfellows, aren't they, than perhaps Scott and Joe were, and that seems to be playing out, doesn't it, in these moments?
Very much. And I mean, if you could put us in, if you equate us with them, I guess our current Prime Minister is more of what you would call an American Democrat. Scott Morrison was more of an American Republican. So ideologically, they don't really sit on the same page. But these two guys really do. They've met on several occasions. They get on really well. They're very politically the same. They have the same tone. They have the same ideals. They have the same desires moving forward. So I think they are better bedfellows, like you say. I think more can be achieved internationally between our two countries with those two fellows at the helm.
And how is it being judged back home then, Rachel, in terms of his performance on the international stage?
Well, we've always been, pretty chuffed with Albo. He's one of the people. He comes from humble beginnings, so we can all relate to him a little better than we could with Scott Morrison. But as far as his performance goes, I think everybody's really impressed. He's managed to hold himself. It was funny actually before the election. His people, you know how you have a team of people who make sure you dress right, look right, talk right, and basically mould you. They were making him look very prime ministerial before he even had that gig. So they had changed his glasses, changed his suits. He'd lost some weight. They'd been working on he's only got a slight speech impediment. They'd been obviously working on that with a dialect coach and an occupational therapist just to make him look prime ministerial. And I think so far on the world stage, he's stood up very well, and he's a very likable guy. He lacks that certain hubris, that sort of ego that Scott Morrison had. He's not as, dare I say, off-putting as our previous Prime Minister was. And I think that's playing really well internationally. I think it's playing very well. And at home, it's playing even more so. I mean, generally speaking, Australia is we're fairly parochial, and we don't care for our Prime Ministers being out of the country terribly much, but we all understand that this is a very strange time. This is a very unusual time. It's a very critical time internationally, and we understand that our Prime Minister has to be out of the country to deal with those issues.
And you gave Boris Johnson a gift, didn't he? What was that?
Oh, yeah, that was so funny. Well, first of all, Biden upstaged just by giving him a custom-made bike. Thanks, Joe. But we gave him a Rabbitohs, and I don't know whether you guys know what the Rabbitohs are. Yeah. Russell Crowe, who you would know, he owns an Australian National Rugby League football team called South Sydney, and its colloquial name is the Rabbitohs. And he presented our Albo presented your Bojo with a Rabbitohs jacket and a Rabbitohs hat. And I thought, well, this is nice for him to step outside in a garden party should he feel a little chilly. But given it's your summer, maybe a T-shirt would have been in better order. But then Biden upstages us by giving him a custom-made bike. Thanks, Joe.
I mean, to be honest with you, Boris Johnson will wear anything, Rachel. He'll wear anything. He looks like a walking stack of hay most of the time anyway, to be honest.
He does. He really does. So I guess the jacket really, it's all good.
Anything could smarten him up. Okay. Elsewhere, and I know we sort of thrust this on you at the last minute, Rachel, so I hope you've had the time to take a look at this. But
always got the time for you.
Good, thank you. But I want to talk about the census, because the census was released this week, wasn't it, in Australia, which has sort of given a bit of a picture of modern Australia and what it looks like and who lives there and what's changing.
It was a funny census this year because, we had a census in August last year when 90% of the country was still in lockdown, stage 4 lockdown, because we were the country that decided to lock down the hardest, and now that doesn't seem to have made much difference. We got lots and lots of COVID anyway. But what we've discovered is that most of the people who live, who were born somewhere else, come from your part of the world, which I thought was surprising, because I thought it would be India or one of the African nations or even New Zealand. But for you guys, it's nearly up to 1 million. you English people are everywhere, and we love it. We truly do. Well, as long as you bring us Jaffa cakes, we're all good.
Yeah, we do have a rich history, Rachel, of getting places the water wouldn't. Not always for the better either, frankly. That's interesting. So what? So is that in recent years then that's happened? I'm trying to think if that sort of played out anecdotally over here. Do I know more people who've moved to Australia? I'm not really sure that I do.
I think we're sort of everywhere. I mean, you walk into your local pub and there's somebody behind the bar pouring a beer, as far as I'm aware, in London. And when I was in London, certainly every second person I came across was Australian pouring a beer. But the last census was taken 5 years ago, so this is within the last 5 years up to now. But it was a very strange census because we had record participants because everybody was home and they didn't have anything else to do but to fill in the census. So that was really interesting. But a couple of interesting things is that, I mean, I guessed India would be the highest, and that's the second highest. China is actually the third, and we believe that's to do with the amount of international students we host. And of course, that all died off during COVID. Nobody could get in, nobody could get out. We had very strict laws. Novak, or as we call him, Novak Djokovic, he would tell you that. New Zealand was the next highest, and that was another one that I thought would definitely be higher. And then the Philippines. It's so funny though, because English being spoken at home is most commonly the first language, but Chinese or Arabic has increased 800,000 people speaking that as a first language since 2016, since that census was last taken. It's amazing. And the other thing that's interesting to me, and how times they are a-changing, is that many Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders are now coming up and identifying themselves as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. When they weren't before, they refused to answer that question. So we've got record numbers of our Indigenous First Nations people putting their hand up and saying, yep, that's me. And I think that's terrific. I really do. I think they should all stick their hand up and be counted. But we also know that millennials now have the numbers, and that's pretty obvious because boomers are getting to a certain age where they're all carking it. But you know what? That's
dropping off the other end. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose millennials.
So they're dwindling, but
that doesn't. I mean, that will change things, right? And I mean, that could actually, have answer a few questions about how Australia's politics has shifted. One of the things we've been talking about is new government, new attitudes, different take on Australia around the world, and that's, I guess, reflected in the fact that millennials think a bit differently.
Agreed. And I think now as Gen Y are moving up as well, you're going to take a shift towards independents and Greens and away from major parties. I think it's only going to be a wave of change that's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And if not, like a tsunami of absolute change. I think the major parties, particularly our Liberal Party, need to, and they're the ones who got defeated in the last election, they need to not only pay attention to women, but pay attention to young folk and how they can draw those people into that party.
Sure. Rachel, a joy to talk to you as ever. Really, really insightful. Nice to see your man out there on the international stage. We'll chat again soon. We'll keep an eye on him and movements in Australia. Thank you, Rachel. Look after yourself and stay well.
Thank you.
Rachel Brunsden, who is in Australia for us, radio presenter based in Melbourne on Talk TV's International News Hour. Into the Sundays next then, before Christo gets here at 5. Bev's been raking through the Sunday papers. We'll bring you the highlights, everything you need to know as we tick into Sunday morning on Talk TV next.